Avatar The Last Airbender is a great show. I think most people can agree on that, and I wanted to talk about some of the lessons we can learn from one of my favourite episodes from the first season. It's in my top 3 episodes of season 1, and I think part of why I like it so much is precisely because it shouldn't be as good as it is. It does all of the things this 8-episode, faster-paced Netflix adaptation of the show is certainly not going to do, by which I mean it kind of does... nothing! Absolutely nothing. There's no Fire Nation soldiers, no Zuko, no bending teachers or old friends, no big backstory reveals or massive character changes, just a volcano and a fortune teller. Episode 14 of season 1, The Fortune Teller. I think it works really, really well. Why is that, and what can we learn from it? And also, do you like trains? I think a common mistake people can make in their writing is to propel the plot forwards as quickly as is humanly possible, in the hopes that it will give the story some pace and tension. You know, like, there's not huge amounts happening here, so let's chuck in some high stakes and some danger and big action and things. And then what you end up with is lots of things happening, a lot of plot, but not much actual story. This is when people would often say the pace is too rushed, but what I think they tend to mean is there's not enough focus on the actual narrative, the actual character and arc and clear progression of some sort that you could trace with your finger. And as an example of that, here we have a really low stakes, low plot episode. Aang and the gang are chilling out by a river when they come across a man being attacked by a platypus bear. A man who seems strangely unfazed by the danger, which he tells them is because the fortune teller Aunt Wu predicted that he would have a safe journey. As such, they decided it'd be fun to visit this fortune teller, so they do. They get their fortunes. Yep. Then, halfway through the episode, Aunt Wu goes out to read the clouds, and she predicts that the nearby volcano won't erupt and destroy their village this year. And then it's 16 minutes into a 24-minute episode where any stakes at all are introduced. Aang learns that actually the volcano is set to erupt. He warns the villagers, but they choose to trust in Aunt Wu's predictions until Aang alters the clouds, thereby forcing Aunt Wu to now make a different prediction. So then they come up with a plan to divert the flow of lava, the town is saved, the episode ends. And so again, it doesn't matter that we lack much in the way of stakes or plot here, because that doesn't always translate into story. Not always. Character arc I think does, and here we have an episode packed full of that, so let's take Katara. She begins this episode seeing Aang very much like a younger kid who is the Avatar, yes, but he's definitely also a child, where Katara in contrast can often act much more mature. She is oblivious to the fact Aang has a crush on her, partly because she sees him as an innocent kid.
Aang's just a good friend. A sweet little guy. Just like Momo.
Then they meet Aunt Wu, and Katara is given the prediction that she will marry a very powerful bending master. It excites her, and it draws out some of her own more childlike enthusiasm again, and she begins endlessly pestering Aunt Wu for more and more minor predictions, which is just a great reminder that whilst Katara often takes on the mum sort of role of the group, trying to emulate her own mother, I think, and be the mature one, she is still actually a kid herself, and just as prone to excitedly bombard people with questions the way Aang often does.
Should I eat a mango or a papaya for breakfast tomorrow? Papaya.
Which is important because no, Katara isn't actually that much older than Aang. He may often seem very kiddish, but as Sokka points out when he's using his airbending against the lava...
Sometimes I forget what a powerful bender that kid is.
I suppose he is.
Hardly a huge dramatic arc, no, but it's still a clear narrative here. This is Katara first starting to appreciate Aang in that kind of light. She begins this episode seeming and believing herself much older, then she gets caught up in ideas of love and future, and then notices Aang. He is on a similar footing or age to her. And then the episode ends. They don't go anywhere further. We'll come to that point in a moment. You could make a similar case for Aang's arc. He wants Katara to like him romantically, so he tries to woo her with a necklace, but it doesn't work. Visiting Aunt Wu gives him a prediction all about his fight with Ozai, and war and destiny, and those are the things to think about, but he wants to know about love. He asks her about that, so she tells him to trust his heart, and he will be with the one he loves. Only he still struggles to trust it, so he tries for a second time to impress Katara, this time acting aloof. That's Sokka's advice to him, but it brings Aang no success. As a third attempt, he goes to pick a panda lily for her, but that's when the volcano happens, and he puts love aside to focus on the danger and the task at hand, just as Aunt Wu's prediction focused on his task at hand, and it's in doing that that he actually then impresses Katara. Not with necklaces or panda lilies or acting aloof, but in being the powerful airbender he naturally is. Being himself, I suppose, trusting himself. Or Sokka. He begins the episode in the usual role of comic relief character who is totally against the idea of fortune telling here. He is proven wrong about it at every turn, made to look stupid.
Look, I'm gonna predict the future now. It's going to keep drizzling. See?
And then Aunt Wu makes clear that his problem is he is in conflict with everything, rather than letting life flow. He is effectively fighting the universe at every turn, for which we see him then repeatedly cause himself injury and become increasingly enraged at how much people trust Aunt Wu.
She said I'd be wearing red shoes when I met my true love.
And how many times have you worn those shoes since you got that fortune?
Every day.
Then of course it's gonna come true!
Even his advice to Aang of acting aloof serves as a kind of opposite to letting life flow. It says shape it, actively make someone be attracted to you. And that, again, also doesn't work. Sokka seems wrong this episode. Until they discover the volcano is set to explode, and that blind faith to calmly trust in Aunt Wu's predictions will get everybody killed. Sokka is then actually right. Suddenly being in conflict with the world can actually be a good thing. We can and should often shape the future. So Aang forces the clouds to reshape, and they force the flow of lava into channels that they dig in the earth, which I think is a nice metaphor to show us the equilibrium between fighting against the world and trusting in its flow. You know, you shouldn't passively accept everything, you shouldn't be fighting and in conflict with it completely, but you can kind of channel and steer it into a fitting direction. As Aunt Wu puts it,
just as you reshape those clouds, you have the power to shape your own destiny.
And therefore, technically both Sokka and the villagers are half right. Thematically, that's a conclusion that ties together these conflict of two opposing concepts, and yeah, it does that cool thing Avatar episodes often do of having Sokka start as the comic character who gets everything wrong and is laughed at, and then it goes, actually he's inventive and capable, and often a very important leader.
I hope this has taught everyone a lesson about not relying too much on fortune telling.
But Aunt Wu predicted the village wouldn't be destroyed, and it wasn't. She was right, after all.
I hate you.
So what does all of that tell us? One, we have 3 central characters, each with a clear arc this episode, each getting to explore something of their character and grow. And 2, we have a very clear theme, a conflict between trusting and shaping destiny that reaches a well-concluded equilibrium in the end. It's not so much the pace that matters here as it is the narrative, the sense of something clear developing and then concluding. The Fortune Teller, I think, is a perfect example as an episode for how well this can work, despite technically not much happening at all. But that is also where the caveat comes in. You know, clear progression, development, I said. If that is true, what actually changes by the end here? Don't they finish this episode pretty much the same as they began? I'm almost certain there's going to be people in the comments saying that they hate this episode on the grounds that nothing happens, and, well, yes and no, that's the thing to discuss next. But first, I am compelled by the universe to mention World Anvil.
Great, Aang. Maybe instead of saving the world, you can go into the
World building.
business.
I don't see why I can't do both.
World Anvil! Yep, they sponsored this video, they're still here, hopefully they'll stay here. World Anvil is an online tool for building worlds, creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for a whole slew of games. Sleuth isn't the right word, I don't know why I said that. Look, you can do all that, you can plan and write stories, you can do all sorts of different stuff for creative projects. I use it for the world building of my novel because my old system of massive Word documents became far too chaotic. Not only does the ability to create timelines with hyperlinks branching off to specific characters or articles or a billion other things, not only does that make it so much easier to quickly find the information I need, it also makes it so much easier to plan things out and kind of keep going. Sometimes a blank Word document for world building is very daunting, so having all sorts of tools to help with visualization, to help you figure out what needs planning next, to keep your brain fizzing and unimpeded, because all of the tools are very straightforward and easy to use. That's really important to me. It's like the sharper an artist's pencils, the freer they are to focus on the art. World Anvil is a very sharp pencil. You can create mind maps, you can rearrange elements of your story, do all sorts of campaign related things for that sleuth of games I mentioned. Yes, link in the description and as a pinned comment should you desire a 51% discount on all their subscriptions, or if you're not yet sure, then try out the free version for as long as you like. That's what I did at first, and now look where I am, shouting their name at you through a screen. World Anvil! I think context matters here in several ways, starting with the most obvious points, which is that this is technically a kids' cartoon, with lots of 20-odd minute episodes that might be shown as repeats on TV. It makes sense in that context to have an episode that isn't directly driving the overall story forwards. Episodic stories that you can watch in isolation, you can enjoy their fun rather than the dramatic development. In that sense, if the progression isn't massively story changing, that's okay. The focus here, after all, I think is much more on comedy. Taking these interesting characters this episode, chucking them into a bizarre scenario. Here it's a village devoted to fortune telling, and then just getting to enjoy how our characters react to that situation. Kind of like a sitcom. Here's our characters, here's this week's wacky scenario, let's see how they fare. Sokka becomes snobbish and annoyed to the point of rage about fortune telling.
Can your science explain why it rains?
Yes! Yes, it can!
Katara becomes too wrapped up in the romance of predicting the future and her dreamy hopes, and Aang, he is caught both between trying to impress Katara and being oblivious and largely dismissive towards Mang here, a character that's trying to attract him before she has to accept that he isn't attracted to her, and then the episode ends with her faintly jealous towards Katara.
Take care. Floozy.
So you got all of that for comedy, and it's fun. Yes. Secondly, there is definitely character progression, I think. Katara doesn't end this episode in a romance with Aang or anything. That would be incredibly fast-paced and odd here. And Sokka will still go on to be mocked like a comic relief character, and Aang will still go on trying to avoid the weight of his world-changing destiny by focusing on fun and love and other light things. All of that is true, however, I still think it does subtly bed in some of their character progression. We, as the audience, start to recognise that Aang and Katara could theoretically work together. They're not so completely at odds as they seemed. That Sokka can definitely develop into a capable leader, and that Aang can definitely be a ferocious fighter. In terms of those second two, both of them later pay off by the end of this season. Little moments like this, where the kids get to show everything they could potentially grow into before it properly happens. I think that's important. But thirdly, and I think most important of all, the basically nothing that's happening here is meaningful in itself. The sitcom setup of this episode matters for who these characters are. They're children, kids, who, have an incredible weight of responsibility and are often forced to behave more grown up than they actually are, but they also want to be kids still, are kids. Getting to see that for an episode matters. The reminder that Katara is still young herself, the reminder that all three of them care about love and romance and want to explore those ideas in their own lives. It's not just fun to let these kids be kids for a bit, it's also meaningful, and as I even kind of hinted earlier, it's one of the key emotional struggles in Aang's character, wanting to live up to the heavy weight of responsibility and also being daunted and wanting to avoid it. We see that literally playing out this episode as Aunt Wu gives him predictions of his destiny where Aang wants to know about love instead, climbing the volcano to pick up Panda Lily for Katara, only then to be faced with the threat of the volcano erupting. All of that is character progression, character conflict, culminating in Aang showcasing his airbending ability to save the town, and Katara recognizing again just how powerful he truly is when he faces up to things. So, on like a meta level, I guess, this struggle between serialized drama and episodic sitcom works because it's meaningful, because that's Aang's own inner struggle. This episode is definitely not the only example in the show of letting the kids just be kids for a bit, but it is one of my favourite for how well it still explores the characters, still provides clear progression and theme, and ties it all neatly to the idea of a fortune teller predicting that the volcano won't erupt. And I guess, generally it's a good lesson to emphasise that making lots of things happen isn't always the best way to add pace to your story. Sometimes it's just to focus a little more on what the narrative progression is and to draw that out much more clearly. And if it does feel like the right time to just let the characters breathe, then it's good to think about why doing that might be meaningful in itself. I guess that's what this episode got me thinking about, but what do you think? Do you agree? Do you hate this episode and find it boring? Sometimes I can find the comedy in this show a little too kiddish and a reminder that I'm not the target audience, but I think this episode is one where it all lands really well for me. Do you want me to talk about my second and first favourite episodes from Season 1? That could be a fun video. Comment all your thoughts, subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Grace, Luke Orr, Treat You Caber, Michael Gallagher, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.